Hello everyone, this is your friend Uzumkai Universe 2.0 and we are back in new fanfic. What if Naruto died at age 10? And a legendary future Naruto took over his body. Part 3. The 8 ninjas of Konoha leapt from branch to branch, steadily making their way towards Konohagakure no Sato. They had been tree hopping for hours and had about 30 minutes until they reached the village gates. Over the course of the journey, the genin of Teams 7 and 10 had been casting befuddled glances at Naruto, some more subtle than others. True to form, however, Naruto simply ignored said looks. He had no intention of putting up with the fuss of sating anyone's curiosity. After all, this was meant to be a vacation reality, and furthermore, it was none of their business. Ino had been confused ever since she witnessed the happenings on the bridge. She kept asking herself when Naruto had gotten so strong. Sure, she remembered how Naruto completely blew past the academy graduating exams, but he hadn't been on the level he was at now. She had to confess that she was amazed at how he effortlessly performed Sealess high-ranked jutsu, as well as his skill in taijutsu and kenjutsu. After getting back from the bridge, Ino had cornered Sakura to find out all that she could about this new Naruto, and she was terribly disappointed. Still, for a consummate gossip like her, the lack of information was telling in and of itself. Also, having a parent who was so highly placed in the intelligence division granted her more insight into the ways of the shinobi. It was the ones you knew nothing about that killed you the fastest. Quickly following on the heels of that morbid thought was a recollection of how Naruto had taken care of Geto and his thugs. Ino had to fight off a shiver at the gruesome memory of smoking and charred corpses. However, ever the busybody, she was determined to know all there was to know about her fellow blonde-haired ninja. Shikamaru's keen mind had been turning over the puzzle that Uzumaki Naruto presented. He recalled an orange-wearing attention-seeking goofball that had possessed the most deplorable ninja skills. That person had disappeared for 3 months, 2 of which had been spent in the hospital, if the rumors were to be believed, only to return fundamentally different. Being one of the most perceptive people in his generation, Shikamaru had noticed on that first day of the new academic year that it wasn't only Naruto's sense of fashion that had undergone a change. His thoughts had been confirmed when he had seen the way Naruto reacted to the taunts thrown his way. He will be the first to admit that once Naruto began to skip classes, he had written off the changes as only superficial. That was until the graduation exams, when Naruto basically made a fool out of everyone, shattering all their preconceived notions with indifferent impunity. Now 3 months later, he shows up again, wielding lightning jutsu with thoughtless ease and wiping out bandit armies like dust from his lapels. However, he remembered what Naruto had said to his teammates on the roof of Tezuna's house, and as such, decided not to bother asking him directly. Though it was troublesome, Uzumaki Naruto intrigued him. Choji was not oblivious to how surprising Naruto was. Before the blue-eyed ninja had changed so much, he would occasionally share a meal with him. After his absence of 3 months, however, Choji rarely ever saw him around. Still, it somewhat surprised him that a genin who graduated with him could be so far above him in skill. Nonetheless, he wasn't too bothered about it, and as such, he saw no need to stick his nose into his comrade's business. Asuma glanced at Kakashi's blonde-haired genin. He had spoken to Kakashi about him after Naruto had healed his injuries. He didn't really know what to think. He hadn't had many interactions with the kid before, so he didn't know how much he had changed. Still, he was grateful to Naruto for healing him, and even though his Junin-level skills were suspicious, he would give the kid, who his dad was so obviously fond of, the benefit of the doubt. Sakura had been silent for most of the return trip. She didn't know what to think. The mission in the Land of Waves had shown her how far behind she was in comparison to her teammates. Sasuke was the rookie of the year and an obvious prodigy. He had always been better than her, and now that he had unlocked his Sharingan, that gap could only possibly widen further. Then there was Naruto. What else was there to say on that matter? Comparing Naruto to herself was like putting Kakashi next to an academy student. Even she had to accept that Naruto was simply too powerful. And now that she thought about it, she asked herself just how he got that strong. From what she remembered, Naruto had been geared to graduate at the bottom of the class. Then out of nowhere, he blew past everyone during the graduation exams, even Sasuke. And just where did he learn medical jutsu from? Sakura had chosen to study medical jutsu, in the hope that it would become her thing on Team 7, thereby showing how useful she could be to Sasuke. Now, Naruto comes along and shows her up as though she was never any competition. She cast one last annoyed look at Naruto and vowed to find out how Naruto had improved so rapidly. Sasuke had been fuming ever since the group had departed for Konoha. He had passed out after Naruto rescued him from the deadly ice user. He had gotten the story of what happened from Shikamaru. Ino and Sakura had been too busy crowding him and being annoying as always. When he learned that Naruto had defeated an opponent that he could not, and then gone on to wipe out so many bandits with one strike, he couldn't believe it. For the first time since the academy graduation, he realized that he had been playing catch-up for so long and was still far behind. No matter how much he had tried, he had never been able to discover Naruto's secrets. He had even tried tailing him a few weeks after their team was formed. He had followed Naruto into a building where he had lost him. Before he could backtrack, he had been swamped by women, prostitutes, who told him that a blonde-haired gentleman had paid them handsomely to entertain him. It was then that he realized that Naruto had been aware of his efforts to tail him and had thus led him to a brothel. He had been abruptly yanked out his musings when he felt a hand cup him there. He had promptly fled the building with a tomato-red face, with the amused, mocking laughter of the women on his heels. He had been unable to meet Naruto's eyes for days after that incident. Still, he comforted himself with the knowledge that he had finally unlocked his bloodline limit. Even though he would probably be unable to copy any of his teammates' jutsu, he would still be able to use the other abilities of the Sharingan against him, like its genjutsu and prediction abilities. With his annoyance replaced by eager anticipation, he turned his thoughts away from his teammate. Kakashi was lost in thought. A ninja of his caliber did not need his full attention to seamlessly travel on the shinobi highway. After Naruto had taken out Gato and his thugs, Kakashi had been too out of it to realize that a genin should never have been able to command such powerful jutsu effortlessly. The events on the bridge were like the straw that broke the camel's back. All the little discrepancies that he had initially brushed aside came back to him, and they would not be dismissed so easily. Being one of the few people who cared enough to know about Naruto's life, he was aware that it was very unlikely that one of the ninja in village was responsible for Naruto's phenomenal skill. That knowledge made him all the more wary of his blonde-haired student's rapid improvement. With one more discreet glance at Naruto, Kakashi vowed to bring his concerns to the Sandaime. The members of Teams 7 and 10 made their way towards the Red Hokage Tower. As they walked along the road, the two Junin noticed the fleeting looks that a few of the villagers threw at the blonde-haired shinobi. They simply put the issue out of their minds, partially correct in their assumption that it was due to Naruto's Jinchuriki status. Before the Eternal Sage had taken the place of Uzumaki Naruto, the interactions between the blue-eyed child and the villagers usually involved most of the villagers blatantly ignoring him. Only a handful of them ever went out of their way to actually verbally abuse him. None of them dared lay a hand on him after the Sandaime had made a public example of a drunk who tried to kill him when he was 4 years old. Being the rambunctious child that he was, Naruto often struck out at his more verbal detractors via his pranks. So, like a feedback loop, his actions worsened the behaviors of the villagers, who in turn escalated the retribution Naruto sought to dish out, until it got to the point where most merchants in Konoha refused to provide service to him. The truth of the matter though was that the more verbal villagers were at their cores, bullies. They derived malicious vindication from seeing Naruto's wide smile become more forced, and his shoulders hunch over more, under their hateful words. The silent observers also felt a sense of guilty of accomplishment when they saw the effect their indifference had on the boy. That all changed after the arrival of the current Naruto. It had taken only 1 week for almost all the villagers to learn that Naruto would no longer take anything dished at him. In fact, he seemed to simply not care, almost as if the world he lived in did not contain any of them. When the more vocal villagers taunted him, he never reacted, he never even raised his head from his book. Now getting a taste of their own medicine, the taunting calls slowly began to dwindle and eventually, stopped altogether under the unyielding indifference of the Kyuubi Jinchuriki. With Naruto no longer caring about the existence of any of the people who attempted to make his life miserable, the more malicious of them began to get frustrated. It was no fun if he didn't feel their displeasure. Then when the first storekeeper tried to triple the prices of his goods, Naruto merely cast him a dismissive glance and left without buying anything. At first they had felt that they could still get to him by their actions, until they witnessed him buy so many goods from the monthly traveling merchants that said merchants probably gained a month's profit in one day. Any attempts at bad-mouthing the boy to the traveling merchants only caused them to be labeled malicious gossips that would do anything to stifle the competition. Their consternation only increased when Naruto began to give the traders quality animal skin and plants which they knew could only have come from the forest of death. With the double blow of losing the patronage of such a relatively rich customer and a source of high-quality raw materials, the merchants slowly stopped treating him like they used. Of course, Naruto never actually went back to buying from them, even when he knew that he would not be overcharged. As months went by, and as the villagers saw him less and less, he slowly passed beneath their notice, the face mask aided his attempts to fade to the background. Most of them had even forgotten what he looked like. At the end of the day, he could walk freely in broad daylight without having to put up with glares and cold shoulders. Only a few people noticed him in particular, and they never did anything. The 8 ninjas stood before the Hokage as each of the 2 Junin gave their respective reports on their missions, with Kakashi including reports on his team's initial escort mission to the Land of Fire's capital. Sarutobi had to stop himself from reacting when Asuma mentioned that he allowed his fresh out of school Kunoichi convince him to continue with the mission after getting its full measure. He would have to give Asuma an official reprimand, Hokage's son or not. His eyebrows rose minutely when his son reported about Naruto's use of Iryu Jutsu, medical jutsu. Then he nearly choked on his pipe when he heard about the happenings on the bridge. After the 2 Junin were done, he dismissed all the 6 genin, noting with interest how Naruto vanished with a muted flash of lightning. When the genin had all left his office, he turned to Asuma and sighing, said, "That was a bad call, Asuma. I have no choice but to give you an official reprimand, marked in your records." Asuma nodded, accepting that he had indeed messed up. As he turned to leave at the Hokage's dismissal, he was suddenly reminded of an encounter he had had with Naruto in Wave. He had been surprised at the time because he knew from Kakashi that Naruto rarely, if ever, started out conversations. Tazuna had just returned from the events on the bridge to find that Geto had sent some thugs to capture his family as insurance. Asuma had intervened, after Inari had stood up to the thugs. He had been watching the tearful reunion of Tazuna and his family when Naruto had spoken in a soft and musing tone only he could hear. "Makes you wonder, doesn't it?" Surprised, he had turned a questioning gaze on the mysterious genin. Seeing his confusion, Naruto had turned a knowing look on him that pinned him in place. "Makes you wonder about the importance of family and loved ones, how no matter the differences between them, family is still family." Now in front of his father, who he hadn't spoken to for a long time, he considered what Naruto had said. Hiruzen looked at Asuma in confusion when he noticed him pause in his exit. His eyes widened in surprise when he heard what Asuma said on his way out. "See you at dinner, father." A glowing smile spread across his face as he watched Asuma, his son, leave the room. He wondered what had happened to change his son's mind, and out of nowhere, an image of a blonde-haired child flashed in his mind. Getting a hold of himself, he turned his attention to the remaining Junin in the room. "So Kakashi, tell me, what are your concerns about Naruto?" Kakashi put his novel away, causing some measure of concern in the Sandaime. He began to detail the various discrepancies he had noticed so far: the Junin level speed, the mastery of Kenjutsu, the chakra control needed to use medical jutsu, as well as seamlessly command powerful bolts of lightning, the superior senses. He also pointed out that all this strength had to have been gained in 2 years at most, all without anyone ever noticing. It wasn't possible. After Kakashi finished, Sarutobi leaned back with a furrow on his brows and exhaled a stream of smoke. He was sad to say that he agreed with Kakashi about the issue with Naruto. However, he was reluctant to force the truth out of the boy. Because he knew that the seal on Naruto would allow no interference from the Kyuubi, he was not too worried about that. Nonetheless, the fact that in 2 years, and with no teacher, Naruto had gained the skills needed to place him on par with Junin-level ninja was a thing of concern. The only reason that he didn't drag the child forward to demand answers from him was the memory of Naruto's body slumped over a blade he had thrust through his own heart. Looking at Kakashi, Sarutobi knew that they were thinking the same thing. Letting loose a world-weary sigh, he made his decision. "I understand what you're saying, Kakashi, but you and I know why it is unadvisable to pressure him into giving us answers. However, I assume you are going to nominate your students for the Chunin exams. Watch him, and if he does anything that endangers either himself or the village, let me know." Giving a resigned nod, Kakashi vanished in a swirl of leaves. The Hokage gave another tired sigh, and then leaned forward to resume his paperwork. The 3 genin of Team 7 entered the exam room to see a huge gathering of genin from other villages. Naruto smoothly sidestepped the blonde missile careening towards him, and then turned to watch calmly as Sasuke was smothered by Yamanaka Ino. He didn't react when Shikamaru spoke up from behind him. "You guys too, huh? Troublesome." Whatever response that statement might have garnered was cut off by the loud and boisterous voice of Inuzuka Kiba. "Woohoo! You guys are here too. This is going to be so awesome." The 9 genin of the most recent graduating class began to intermingle amongst themselves, until they were interrupted by another newcomer. The silver-haired genin spoke in a chiding tone. "You really should not be so noisy. There, take a look behind you." The genin turned, and most of them blanched when they noticed the murderous looks being thrown their way by the rest of the room's occupants. Yakushi Kabuto noted, with interest, that neither Uzumaki Naruto nor Uchiha Sasuke seemed to be bothered by the killing intent. Making a note of his observation, he continued. "Since I'm a fellow Konoha genin who has taken these exams before, I'll help you out free of charge." Then, with a flourish, he produced a deck of cards. Before any of the genin before him could wonder at the purpose for the cards, he explained. "These are info cards which I created using my experience with the exams. They have on them information about all the villages participating in these exams, as well as information on the individual genin themselves. So, who do you want to know about?" Sasuke noticeable perked up at that. His mind flashed back to the interactions he had had with 2 other genin, and so he stepped forward to request. "Tell me about Rock Lee, Sabaku no Gaara, and Uzumaki Naruto." Ignoring the confusion of his fellow genin at him requesting information about his own teammate, he focused on Kabuto. Kabuto suppressed any amusement he might have felt at hearing Sasuke ask about the enigmatic Kyuubi Jinchuriki. he had heard talk among the Junin of the boy's actions on a C-rank turned A-rank mission to the Land of Waves. Refocusing on the genin before him, he spoke up as his hands deftly fetched cards from his deck. It becomes far easier when you already know their names. Okay. First up is Rock Lee, non-existent skills in ninjutsu and genjutsu, but superb in taijutsu. He has been on 2B-ranked missions, 23 C-ranked missions, and numerous D-ranked missions. Next is Sabaku no Gaara. He has been on 10 C-ranked missions, 8 B-ranked missions, and has never once been injured on any of them. Finally, we have. The surrounding genin blinked in surprise at the pause, until they noticed Kabuto shuffling through his deck with furrowed eyebrows. A look of confusion crossed his face when he realized that he couldn't find the third card. As one, the gathered genin swung their gazes to Naruto, only to find his head buried in his book as usual. Huffing out exasperated breaths, they turned back to Kabuto, who had continued to tell them about those attending the exams. If they had looked closer, they would have found a ninja info card acting as a bookmark in Naruto's book. Team 7 stood in front of their assigned gate, waiting for the signal to commence the second part of the Chunin selection exams. Sakura shuffled nervously in place, while Sasuke's clenched fists were the only indicators of his trepidation. Naruto, however, was deep in thought. He had made a promise to himself, to ensure that the name, Uzumaki Naruto, would be known throughout the elemental nations. It was the least he could do for the young boy whose life he now lived. After he met Gaara a few days before the Chunin exams began, he had come to realize that this Gaara was a little more far gone than he was used to. He hadn't yet decided if he was going to try to redeem the red-haired shinobi, but one thing he knew was that Gaara was the only genin capable of giving him the kind of fight that would place his name among the up-and-coming legends of his generation. However, things were not so simple because, as his senses had indicated, Orochimaru was present, and that generally meant that there would be an invasion. So, the next few days were going to be important to him, if he intended to do as he had promised himself. When Orochimaru ambushes his team, in order to test the strength of his intended vessel, Naruto plans to fight him. The purpose was to get Orochimaru to take an interest in him. From what he knew of the snake Sannin from lives past, he was at heart a scientist and was always interested in intriguing individuals. The trick was to rouse his interest enough that he would want to see what Naruto was capable of, wanted enough to delay the invasion until he watched Naruto go up against either Gaara or Sasuke in the finals. However, he wanted to avoid taking it too far and causing Orochimaru to consider him a threat to be eliminated. It was unfortunate, but Naruto would probably allow Orochimaru mark Sasuke with his cursed seal of heaven. He put such thoughts from his mind once he heard the sound signifying the start of the second round of the Chunin selection exams. Like a shot, all the teams were off. Team 7 blurred through the trees, with Sasuke taking point. None of the other two noticed Naruto making clones, which promptly took off to hunt down other teams and capture whatever scrolls that they could. Sasuke had immediately assumed leadership of the team, casting a challenging look at Naruto, who merely smiled in return. They kept on traveling through the day, since Sasuke was determined to cover as much ground as possible on the first day, before they went about trying to obtain the needed Heaven Scroll. They didn't encounter any opposition during the day, and chose to camp out in a cave Naruto had found. After a meal of ration bars, the three genin set out the next day. Naruto's sharp senses picked up on Orochimaru's presence suddenly appearing in the vicinity. So, he wasn't fazed when a gust of chakra-reinforced wind slammed into him, propelling him far away from his team. He easily controlled his fall and smoothly landed on the side of a tree. Without faltering for even an instant, he was already in motion, jumping away from the tree he was on just as a 20-foot snake crashed through the place he had been standing. To kill time, he elected to play a game of cat and mouse with the snake, though he was sure the snake wrongly assumed just who the mouse was. Sasuke stood panting across from the slightly scuffed figure of the grass kunoichi. He had thrown everything he had at her, and still she calmly stood there, smiling sinisterly at him. Forcefully calming his uneven breathing, he prepared his last gambit. Hurtling forward at speeds above what most genin could achieve, he threw a series of fast-paced punches and kicks at the Kusanin. His Sharingan was able to follow the retaliatory punch launched at his face, but his body was too slow to do anything about it. The punch thundered into his face, launching him away from his opponent. Not even hesitating, he hurled 10 shurikens simultaneously along circuitous paths. With the same smirk on her face, the kunoichi smoothly evaded them, only moving as much as needed to have the projectiles just brush by. Her eyes widened, however, when she noticed the ninja wire attached to the shuriken, only in time for her to be bound to the tree behind her. Not wasting his chance, Sasuke clenched the end of the wires in his mouth and snarled out, "Kaden, Ryuka no Jutsu, Fire Release, Dragon Fire Technique." A huge roaring torrent of flames surged down the ninja wire and met at the kunoichi's location in an explosion of heat, light, and sound. Sasuke let loose a breath of relief when he heard the kunoichi's screams. However, his relief fled him when he noticed that what he thought were screams of pain were actually screams of exultation. He stumbled back in shock and fear as the Kusanin emerged from the flames, slowly peeling of the charred skin of her face to reveal a pale smirking visage beneath it. He spoke up in a tone that felt like snakes crawling under skin. "Kukuku Sasuke-kun, you truly are a delight. Such promise you have. Yes, you truly are that man's brother." Orochimaru's sickening grin widened further when he noticed the flinch Sasuke released at the mention of Itachi. He made his decision, quickly weaving through hand seals, his neck elongated grotesquely, launching his head towards the petrified genin. His jaws extended beyond human norm and his fangs lengthened in preparation. Sasuke let loose a scream of intense pain as Orochimaru clamped down, imparting his cursed seal of heaven on the boy. Orochimaru was in the process of retracting his head, when his eyes widened and he abruptly wove his body to side. He avoided the spear of lightning by a hair's breadth. He quickly focused his serpentine gaze on the new arrival and smiled in glee as he noticed the blonde-haired child coolly gazing back at him. His senses noticed 2 clones of the Kyuubi Jinchuriki arriving and leaving with his 2 teammates, but he ignored them, having already accomplished his goal. Turning back to the blonde, he prepared to speak, but was interrupted. "Orochimaru the snake charmer, what brings you to this part of the woods?" Now amused, Orochimaru responded. "Oh, you know of me, little genin. I'm surprised. I would have thought that my actions would have kept the academy from teaching about me. After all, Konoha has a habit of trying to bury unpleasant truths." Naruto merely gave an eye smile in response, and said, "Nah, the huge snake was kind of a dead giveaway. Might I inquire as to what you just did to my teammate?" Since you asked so nicely, I think I could answer that. I gave him a taste of what power could be his if he came to join me. I have seen his soul, little genin, and I know that he will seek me out for more power eventually." Watching to see what Naruto would do in response to his explanation, Orochimaru noticed his subtle shift in stance and prepared himself to test the genin before him. With a flash, they were off. The 3 clones finally landed beside a huge hollowed-out trunk. The lead clone turned to Sakura as the clone carrying her placed her on her feet. "Make camp here and tend to Sasuke. 2 of us will leave to aid the original while the last one will set up some perimeter traps. We don't have a lot of equipment, so don't rely too much on the traps." Without giving her a moment to respond, the lead clone was off, followed by one of the other 2. Naruto's fists were a blur as he attacked the snake Sannin, moving at speeds that put Sasuke to shame, a fact which Orochimaru noted with interest. The hubby Sanin's fluid taijutsu style allowed him to move in odd ways to avoid all the attacks headed his way. He was obviously not going all out on the genin, but still, he was impressed that Naruto was keeping up with the pace so far. Deciding to kick it up a notch, he began to counterattack. Amazingly, Naruto was able to avoid 4 out of every 5 attacks launched his way, even managing to hit Orochimaru a few times. Naruto suddenly jumped away from Orochimaru and with no warning beforehand, he spat out in Orochimaru's direction, Raiden, Gion, lightning release, false darkness. Orochimaru's eyes widened as the genin seamlessly launched a B-ranked jutsu at full power. Deciding to play along, he formed a single-hand seal and said, Fuden, Shinkugyoku, wind release, balls of wind, and spat out 5 balls of tightly compressed cutting winds at the airborne genin. The lightning spear was destroyed by one of the balls of wind, reducing their number to 4. While still airborne, Naruto rejoined, Raiden, Raryuden, lightning release, lightning dragon bullet. A huge crackling blue dragon made of lightning plowed through the balls of wind and then exploded when it impacted the place Orochimaru had been standing in. Naruto landed on the side of tree and promptly ducked as roundhouse kick tore through the air above his head. He returned with a rising elbow which just grazed the tip of Orochimaru's nose as he leaned back to avoid the blow. Still leaning back, Orochimaru's leg came up to impact heavily into Naruto's stomach, causing Orochimaru to let out a hiss of pain as the lightning clone was dispelled in a release of lightning. A sword erupted from his chest as he stood back upright. However, Naruto never stopped moving as he spun and cut through the air behind him, forcing Orochimaru to pull back. Smirking at the increasingly fascinating genin, Orochimaru opened his mouth wide and reached in to pull out the famed Kusanagi. Turning back to the genin, he said, Kukuku, you surprise me, Naruto-kun. However, as I'm sure you know, this is the Kusanagi, there is no material it cannot cut. In response to that, Naruto simply channeled chakra into his ninjutsu, causing previously invisible seals to light up. With a low hum, his blade began to vibrate at insane speeds, increasing its cutting power 100-fold. Then lightning crackled down the length of the blade, further increasing its lethality. Smile widening at the display, Orochimaru lunged forward and began a lethal dance of steel with the blonde-haired genin. Naruto fought with all the skill that his level 7 custom limiter seal would allow. He skillfully traded blows with the fellow master swordsman, just managing to turn aside attacks that would have fatally poisoned anyone else. They continued like that for a few more minutes until Naruto suddenly switched things up again by intoning, Raiden, Kangekiha, lightning release, wave of inspiration. The surge of lightning traveled down his blade and into the Kusanagi, forcing Orochimaru to disengage or risk further electrocution. Naruto had begun breathing a little heavier from the effort of battling such a high-level opponent while being restricted as he was. The little cuts he had sustained from the famed grass cutter sealed with a hiss as his accelerated healing factor kicked. Orochimaru's attention was drawn to Naruto as he watched his injuries heal before his eyes. Then Orochimaru almost sighed as he realized that he had gotten sidetracked and spent too much time with the blonde-haired ninja. He would have to bring things to a close. He tossed his sword through the air and blurred through hand seals before slamming his hands on the floor. Naruto allowed his eyes to widen as he felt Orochimaru's chakra spike to high levels as he said, Kuchio's no jutsu. The Anbu and Hokage perked up when they sensed a huge spike of chakra from the forest of death. Stepping up to his window, Sarutobi turned his gaze in the direction of the chakra eruption in time to see a huge plume of smoke clear to reveal what his sharp eyes saw to be a huge snake. He was already zipping towards the disturbance before the Anbu around him could make sense of what they were seeing. Orochimaru, he thought to himself, what is it that you are searching for here? Knowing that his former sensei and Konoha Anbu would have felt the chakra spike, he commanded the snake to make quick work of the genin. The huge summon lunged for the tree that Naruto stood on. It crashed through the tree, narrowly missing its intended target, and turned to find its elusive prey. A shadow had both it and Orochimaru looking upwards to see the temporarily airborne form of Naruto finish weaving through a few hand seals. Then locking gazes with the widening eyes of the snake Sannin, Naruto roared out, Raiden, Raryu no Koko, lightning release, roar of the lightning dragon. A huge torrent of crackling yellow lightning exploded out of Naruto's mouth. The approaching Konoha ninja arrived in time to watch the world disappear in a roaring flash of golden light and booming thunder. When the light had cleared from their eyes, and the ringing from their ears, they discovered that everything that had been below Naruto in about a 15-foot radius was destroyed, including the huge summons creature. The surrounding Anbu shook off their shock and turned to the Hokage for guidance. Shaking his head, he indicated that they should spread out and search for the traitor Sannin. He cast a contemplative look at Naruto, turned to observe the damage caused by his one attack, and then turned to join his men in his search. Naruto sensed the departure of the ninja, and sighed to himself. Although he had succeeded in his objective concerning Orochimaru, he knew that the Sandaime would soon be demanding answers from him. Well, he thought as he began tracking down his teammates, it's not like I haven't dealt with stuff like that before. Naruto had made a slight detour to receive the scrolls that the clones he had sent out had obtained. All in all, he had 3 heaven scrolls and 2 earth scrolls. He was steadily making his way back to his teammates, moving leisurely since he was in no hurry. He was also taking the time to let his currently limited reserve regenerate. His fight with Orochimaru had taken a lot out of him because he had refused to release even one level of his limiter seal. He was currently at half the strength of level 7. He slowed down his approach and concealed his presence from all those in the clearing ahead of him, even from the Hyuga hidden in a tree on the other side. It was the work of a moment for him to understand what he was seeing. Orochimaru must have sent the sound nins to test Sasuke's cursed seal. Sasuke was still out of it however, and so Sakura had taken a beating, as had Rock Lee who had tried to aid her. He was about to intervene when he felt Sasuke's chakra warp and begin to rise steadily. The gathered genin, members of Team 10, Rock Lee, Sakura, and the sound nin, turned their attention to the source of steadily rising foul chakra, to find Sasuke standing with odd markings spreading across his skin. Sasuke smiled in deranged pleasure as felt a wonderful power coursing through his body. He felt invincible as he was. With this power, I can definitely surpass that blonde-haired nuisance and be closer to killing him. His gaze cut to one of the sound nins present, and suddenly, he vanished. Kintsuchi let loose a cry of pain as Sasuke's rising foot smashed into the underside of her jaw. Before she completely left the ground, he pivoted and delivered a powerful roundhouse kick to her airborne body, propelling her forcefully into a tree. The surrounding genin winced when they heard the distinct sound of bones breaking on impact. With a snarl of rage on his face, Zaku flung his hands towards Sasuke and screamed out, Zenkyokukuha, extreme decapitating air waves. A huge gust of deadly cutting air exploded out of his palms, leaving him panting from the chakra usage. The wave of air tore across the clearing, bearing down on the still stationary Uchiha Sasuke. With a grin of triumph, Zaku watched as the waves crashed on the position of the black-haired genin, totally obliterating everything in its path. Before any of the present people could react, Zaku was suddenly on his knees, with his hands held behind him in the unyielding grip of the bloodthirsty Avenger. Sasuke was too far gone to even bother with talking and so pressed his right foot against Zaku's back, and with a deranged grin on his face, he heaved his hands backwards and disarmed the sound genin, literally. The surrounding people blanched as a ripping sound echoed throughout the clearing, followed by the tortured screams of Zaku. A few of them almost threw up at Sasuke's extreme actions, finally recognizing that something was terribly wrong with him. Dosu stumbled back in terror as Sasuke's insane gaze focused on him. Hoping to save himself, he stuttered out. Please, please take our scroll and let me leave with my teammates. I'm sorry for attacking you, I swear I'll never. Dosu flinched in fear as Sasuke vanished from his position. He, along with everyone watching, believed that Sasuke was about to tear him apart as well. It was, therefore, with understandable surprise that the genin present noticed Sasuke halt halfway towards Dosu, held in place by the hand resting against his chest. They quickly made out the owner of the hand to be the last member of Team 7, Uzumaki Naruto. The members of Team 10 relaxed in relief, an action that did not go unnoticed by the other genin. Wondering why Team 10 would feel relieved at the presence of the newcomer, they focused on the happenings in the center of the clearing. Naruto's customary calm tone was then heard through the air. I do believe that you have made whatever point you intended quite clear, and now, we are simply wasting time. He has surrendered his scroll, let us take it and complete this stage of the exams. All was still as Sasuke stood there considering his teammates' words. Naruto read his eyes however, and knew what was going to happen next. Sasuke's right hand came up in a fist, on a course to bury itself in Naruto's masked face. It never got there. With a slight hum of electrical energy as the only prior warning, the hand placed against Sasuke's chest erupted with lightning, locking Sasuke's muscles in place and delivering massive shock to his system. 3 seconds later, it was over, and Sasuke slumped forward in unconsciousness. Naruto caught him and lifted him onto his shoulder, noting that the cursed seal was retracting. Before the stunned eyes of the genin, he turned to the unconscious form of Sakura, and with no prior warning, a clone materialized next to her and scooped her up as well. Suddenly, they were all gone from the clearing, leaving the results of Sasuke's rampage behind them. The Konoha genin turned to look at Dosu, only to notice that he had taken the chance to flee with his injured teammates. Naruto stood with the other exam participants as the Hokage's speech wound to a close. He noticed Gaara's bloodthirsty gaze focused on him, but he did not react to it, not yet. After Hayate ended his own speech, and Kabuto withdrew himself, the matches began. His attention wandered as Sasuke defeated Akado Yoroi, and Shino proved too much of a match for an armless Zaku. He then watched as Kankuro killed his opponent, Tsurugu Masumi. He focused on the fight between Sakura and Ino, wanting to see if Sakura's improvements would do her any good. He was disappointed to note that the match ended with a double knockout. It was as he thought. At the time of graduation, Ino had been better in the ninja arts than Sakura. Sakura only became top kunoichi because of her book scores. So, when Sakura improved herself, she only attained a level at par with her love rival, who was from a predominant ninja family herself. The next match was between Temari and Kiba. It was violently short after Temari, and practically everyone else, noticed Kiba ogling her. As Kiba launched into a Gatsuga, dual-piercing fang, Temari charged her battle fan with a wind jutsu, then swung it at an incoming Kiba. As soon as all his forward momentum had been neutralized by her fan, she released the jutsu point blank, viciously launching him into the wall while simultaneously cutting him up. It was over in seconds. With a smirk on her face as she turned to leave, Temari said to the barely conscious genin, "Women hate a man who is too quick to finish." And with the laughter of some of the surrounding ninjas in his ears, Kiba passed out. Shikamaru faced off against the barely recovered Kintsuchi, where he outsmarted her and knocked her out. Neji fought his cousin and ruthlessly took her apart, much to the anger of the spectating Konoha nin. Dosu defeated Choji, channeling his frustration and anger at the Konoha shinobi into his fight. Then Gaara faced off against Rock Lee, providing the spectators with the best fight they had seen so far. Despite Rock Lee's trump card of opening 5 of the 8 celestial gates, Gaara still triumphed, crushing Lee's arm and leg with his sand. When it was his turn, Naruto casually meandered down the stairs for his battle with Tenten. The two contestants stood facing each other, even when the signal to begin was given. Tenten decided to start off with an observation. You know, our sensei told us not to underestimate you, but I just don't see it. Merely raising an eyebrow at her, Naruto said nothing to that. With a huff at his silence, Tenten began to launch kunai and shuriken at him with deadly accuracy. Still maintaining his unbothered look, Naruto began to weave through the hail of lethal projectiles. Tenten was getting increasingly frustrated with her inability to hit the slippery genin, and in a fit of pique, she ceased her barrage of weapons and jumped in the air. While airborne, she took out a sealing scroll and unrolled it, coiling it around her as she did. She then shouted out, Ito Ryu, rising single dragon. A veritable rain of metal death was unsealed and hurled at the blonde-haired genin, moving at terrifying speeds. With merely a tilted head in consideration, Naruto moved. His hands blurred out to pluck the first two weapons closest to him, a tanto and a kunai, and then using them, he began to deflect everything headed at him. For the few seconds that the jutsu was active, the sound of metal on metal echoed through the room, causing the spectators to lean forward, hoping to glimpse what was happening to Naruto inside the cloud of dust he was in. The jutsu finally ended and Tenten landed on the floor, breathing hard from the exertion. The cloud of dust cleared to reveal a sight that stunned her for a moment. Naruto stood there, not a single scratch on his body, holding one of her tantos and a kunai. There was a perfect semicircle of untouched ground behind him, where not a single weapon had landed. Gritting her teeth in frustration, Tenten initiated the second part of her jutsu. With a flex of her fingers, all the weapons on the floor were launched into the air, guided by the ninja wire she now held. A crackling sound drew her attention to Naruto, to see the kunai he had held in his hand hurtling through the air towards her. She twitched her fingers and one of her airborne weapons moved to intercept the airborne kunai, while the rest lunged for Naruto from above. When the interceptor weapon hit the kunai, most of her other weapons had already traveled past it, closer to Naruto. The sound of the metal hitting another metal was quickly followed by the sound of lightning discharging as the lightning chakra Naruto had trapped the kunai with exploded. The lighting was drawn to all the metal around it and promptly surged down the ninja wire surrounding the kunai that had contained it, traveling back to the budding weapon's mistress. She only had time to widen her eyes before the lightning arrived at her hands. After the seconds-long light show ended, Tenten's lightly cooked standing body was revealed. With a sound like a sigh, she fell over backwards, unconscious. After a few moments of stunned silence, Hayate's voice rang out. Winner, Uzumaki Naruto. Naruto walked down the streets of Konoha as he pondered what he should do during the one-month break before the finals of the Chunin exams. He turned to the side as the Anbu that had been trailing him finally decided to reveal himself. Suppressing a twitch at being sensed by a genin, the Anbu spoke in a monotone. Uzumaki-san, Hokage-sama requests your presence. After a nod, the Anbu vanished in a cloud of smoke. Naruto sighed and then prepared himself for the confrontation that was coming. He had already decided on how he was going to play it, and so, with no trace whatsoever, he disappeared from the streets of the village. Naruto's steps didn't falter as he entered the Hokage's office, even as he noticed the added presences of his current one-eyed teacher and the legendary Toad Sannin. He came to a stop at a respectable distance from the Hokage and said, You sent for me, Hokage Jiji. Quote. Jiraiya's keen eyes observed the blonde-haired boy standing before his sensei. He noticed, with no small amount of incredulity, that the kid seemed completely at ease in the presence of three of Konoha's top ninja. From what his sensei had already told him about his godson, he knew that Naruto would probably be able to guess at his identity. Still, one would expect a genin to show some nerves when faced with three Konoha legends, but the kid was rock steady. He quickly tuned into the conversation about to happen, determined to get the truth about the mysterious child. Yes, Naruto-kun, I did. My ninja informed me that there was a missing nin present during the second stage of the Chunin exams. I want to know if you encountered him. With a nod, Naruto said. Yes, it was Orochimaru of the Sannin. Releasing a weary sigh, the Hokage said. And then what happened? I arrived just as he was biting my teammate, Uchiha Sasuke. I launched an attack to distract him while 3 of my clones removed my teammates from immediate danger. I asked him what his purpose was and he told me that he wanted to give Sasuke a taste of power. He was confident that Sasuke would seek him out for more. After fighting with me for some minutes, he then left. Quote. The old man was quiet for a moment, just looking at Naruto with an unreadable look in his eyes. He then asked, how? Seeing Naruto's look of confusion, he elaborated, with his voice steadily rising as his frustration got the better of him. How does a genin fight with a ninja like Orochimaru and come out relatively unharmed? How does a genin ceaselessly produce an unseen jutsu that wipes out countless enemy bandits? How does an academy student go from being the bottom of his class to breaking all previously held records in the graduating exam in just under 2 years? And how does a child improve so much without anyone teaching him or noticing? Naruto's face was blank and unreadable as he gazed back at the sandaime. He noticed that all 3 ninja were entirely focused on him. Then Jiraiya decided to add his own input, giving Naruto the opening he needed to pull off his deception. Look kid, it's not that we're not glad that you improved. The issue is that no matter how you look at it, such strength is suspicious. Why don't you just tell us who it was that taught you and we can get this thing settled once and for all? Jiraiya had to fight back a flinch as Naruto's eyes lost their blank look and gained a look of barely restrained fury. When those raging blue eyes cut to him, he drew back slightly, suddenly feeling as though he were staring down a furious yellow flash himself. When Naruto's voice came out, they all heard the suppressed rage in his tone. You are 12 years too late to be asking anything of me, dear godfather. Quote. The Hokage's office was silent. None of the 3 adults present knew how to react to Naruto's angry statement. Jiraiya, in particular, had paled and kept opening and closing his mouth, unsure of what to say. Seeing that he had them off kilter, Naruto began to weave his magic. Slumping his shoulders and allowing defeat and melancholy to color his tone, Naruto spun his tale. Sarutobi, Jiraiya, and Kakashi all focused on Naruto as he began to speak. Jiraiya was the only one of the 3 who wasn't stunned by the picture of defeat Naruto presented. Having not known the boy as the other 2 had, he had nothing to compare with. Still, some part of him recognized that such an aura of defeat did not lend itself well to a child whose presence bore such a strong resemblance to that of his dead student. All other thoughts fled from his mind as Naruto began to speak, each question aimed at him slowly causing him to draw further into himself in shame. Naruto did not shout. His voice remained dull, lifeless, and just disappointed. You were supposed to take care of me. Where were you when the orphanage kicked me out, and I had to survive on the streets until Gigi found me? Where were you when none of the teachers would teach me anything, and I failed my tests because I couldn't even understand the questions being asked of me? Where were you when shopkeepers refused to sell me anything, forcing me to wear that orange monstrosity and live off ramen for years? Where were you when I found out just why it was that they called me demon brat? At that last question, the gathered ninja paled in horror. Before any of them could interject, Naruto asked one last question, causing Sarutobi and Kakashi to close their eyes in remembered sorrow. Where were you, 2 years ago, when I tried to kill myself, when I died? Kakashi's lone eye was staring blankly into space, incapable of focusing on the here and now. True to his prediction at the time, the memories of Naruto's motionless body, corpse, had not left him even now. The macabre scene had been forever branded in his memory by his spinning red and black eye. He had never known how badly Naruto was treated, but if he was honest with himself, he would recognize that he had never allowed himself to find out. It made it easier to pretend that his sensei's son was well taken care of if he didn't know for sure otherwise. Of course, he was aware that some of the villagers were more vocal in the dislike of Naruto, but he never imagined that they went so far as to deny him service in shops, or even sabotage his education. Now, after hearing just how much Naruto had had to endure with only the support of a handful of individuals, Kakashi morbidly wondered how the kid had lasted a full decade before taking a sword to himself. He quickly dismissed such thoughts. They brought to mind uncomfortable images of his own father's death. This was one of the rare moments when Sarutobi truly felt his age. Standing before him was the product of one of his greatest mistakes, even worse than the debacle with his traitorous student. Internally, he cursed himself for ever allowing himself to bend to the whims of sentimental folly and announce the truth behind the events of the Kyuubi attack. His misplaced belief in the non-existent fortitude of the people of Konoha had caused Naruto to suffer as he should never have. To think that even a cheerful and optimistic child, like Naruto had been, could be driven to suicide at the too young age of 10 left him feeling weak and useless. This was not the Konoha that his teachers had dreamt up, and then given their lives to create. This was not the will of fire of that Namikaze Minato had sacrificed himself to preserve. It had become a pale shadow of its former self, and having listened to Naruto's summary of his life thus far, it was not a village he could take pride in anymore. Jiraiya wavered between extreme murderous fury and paralyzing shame and horror. 12 years ago, when he had learned of the sacrifice his student had made, he knew he had a choice to make. At the time, he believed that choosing to protect Konoha from outside threats was the right choice. Evidently, he was wrong. Standing there, looking at the kid he was supposed to have raised as a son in the absence of his student, he realized just how much he had failed. He could have easily dropped in occasionally, to make sure that Naruto was growing up properly, but he had managed to convince himself, time and time again, that the child was fine and did not need him. The child, slumped in defeat before him, indicated that he had made the wrong call. Possibly an even worse failure than he had had with his traitorous teammate. And now, because he had chosen to leave, run away, his godson had killed himself. Breaking out of his state of self-disgust, he quickly went over that thought. His godson had killed himself. How was he only finding out about it? Suddenly, he recalled one of the periodic reports from his sensei, mentioning that Naruto had been hospitalized for a few months. He nearly bit his tongue restraining himself from ripping into the Sandaime Hokage for not informing him of his godson's attempted suicide. It helped that he knew he was not blameless in the matter. Just as he thought that Naruto had shocked him enough, the kid continued, forcing Jiraiya into a near catatonic state. With a reminiscent and musing tone, as though he were lost in pleasant memories of times past, Naruto continued. Dad was so pissed, you should have seen him. He looked like he could just flash around Konoha, killing everyone. And Mom, hey, she said she wanted to, quote, tear all those apart and bathe in their blood. Sarutobi, unable to believe just what Naruto was saying, just what he was implying, stuttered out. You met them. How? His question broke the other two men out of their funk, causing them to fully focus on Naruto. Neither the Sandaime nor Jiraiya even considered the full implications of Naruto knowing his parents' identities. They were too distracted by what Naruto had just revealed. Yes, I met them. Apparently, when Dad crafted the seal, he included a failsafe. If it were ever the case that the seal was in danger of being completely unraveled, a portion of his chakra, which he included in the seal, would get to work mending it. Quote, the gathered ninja stood in awe of the sheer genius of the Yondaime Hokage. Naruto, meanwhile, stood and watched them fully digest all that he had unloaded on them. He knew that one of them was bound to notice, and point out, that although the information he had just shared was incredible, he still hadn't explicitly stated who had taught him. True to his prediction, the Sandaime leaned forward with furrowed brows and spoke in a hesitant sort of tone. While what you have shared with us leaves a lot of food for thought, Naruto-kun, I couldn't help but notice that it still does not fully tell us who your teacher was. I mean, I was there and from what I recall, you couldn't have been dead for more than a minute, two at the most. Both Jiraiya and Kakashi snapped out of their states of shock, after hearing about Naruto meeting his dead parents, and quickly refocused on the present. They too were curious about whatever Naruto's response would be. With a put-upon sigh, Naruto explained, lied. What Dad had done was to basically seal cage buncheons of both himself and Mom along with the Kyuubi. After meeting with them, and spending time together, the chakra eventually ran out, causing them to be dispelled. You all know that when a shadow clone is dispelled, the original gains the experience of the clone. In this case, however, their original bodies were not present, and so, the returning chakra went to the nearest most viable host, their child. I am sure I don't need to tell you that children often inherit some chakra traits from their parents, and so, in the absence of Mom and Dad's bodies, I was the next best thing. Since I am not a perfect chakra copy of either of them, some of the memories were lost in translation, but what little I did get went a long way in helping acquire the strength I have today. It wasn't like with a normal cage buncheon, I only knew some of the skills in my mind, I had to teach my body and chakra to be able to use them. The office was silent after his explanation. The three adult ninjas were trying to take in all that Naruto had said up until that point. It was almost unbelievable, but all three of them were intimately familiar with the unparalleled genius of Namikaze Minato, and after seeing him summon the death god to do his bidding, they wouldn't put Naruto's recounting as beyond him. They all spent a few moments thinking about what they had just heard. Each of the three men, in their own way, had owed it to the Uzumaki Namikaze family to take care of its only living member. Each of the three men, in their own way, had failed. The Sandaime sighed out a stream of tobacco smoke. His eyes were sorrowful and his form was sagging with shame. Naruto, my boy, I have failed you. Jiraiya had to fight back a wince at the amount of feeling his sensei was able to pack into that one sentence. The knowledge that he too had failed his godson only made things that much worse. Before the Sandaime could continue with his self-flagellation, Naruto let loose a sigh. As though he were letting out all his internal burdens, Naruto visibly straightened before them, gathering his composure. A few moments after, he looked his usual calm and unruffled self. He spoke up then. It's okay, old man. It's in the past now. I'm hardly going to raise a fuss over something that you can't undo. It is enough for me to know that you care now, and that you always have. The Hokage smiled in pride at just how much Naruto had grown. However, even as he slightly inclined his head in acceptance of Naruto's forgiveness, he made a personal vow to do right by the child from then on. Ignorance would not be an excuse. Jiraiya gazed thoughtfully at the young man his godson had become. He felt a momentary pang of loss at the fact that he had missed Naruto's growth. He quickly consoled himself with the knowledge that he now had the chance to make up for all the lost time, if Naruto would let him. Kakashi, while happy with the resolution of the situation, was also saddened by the fact that he would have to spend the coming months solely training Sasuke. Even the knowledge that Naruto would probably be taken care of by Jiraiya could not placate him. Now that he knew how terrible Naruto's life had been, he was all the more eager to spend time with him and be there for him more than he had before. With the more difficult part of the conversation out of the way, the four ninjas were more comfortable with each other. The three adults began to talk with Naruto about his achievements, all the time being told embellished truths sandwiched between believable lies. Jiraiya brought the discussion to a close when he just about leered at Naruto. So kid, care to show me what you've got? Naruto stood next to Shikamaru, along with the rest of the participants who had made it to the finals. The entire stadium was packed with many people, both foreigners and locals, all hoping to be entertained by the up-and-coming new generation of shinobi. The daimyos of the various main countries were in attendance, along with their massive entourages, all of them hoping to be entertained by their respective vassals. Gazing around, Naruto took note of the absences of both Sasuke and Dosu. He hoped things played out as they usually did, and Sasuke ended up late to his own match, his plans depended on it. Up in the stands, most of the Konoha ninja were gathered close to each other, with the Junin sitting not too far from their genin students. Asuma turned to Kurenai and spoke. These matches promised to be special. Being aware of the suspicion surrounding the Chunin exams and the threat of hostile action by Orochimaru of the Sannin, she couldn't help but agree with her comrade, unaware that she had totally misunderstood what Asuma had meant. They both looked to their right as they sensed someone plop down in the seat beside them. The slightly psychotic grin tipped them off to the person's identity, long before they noticed her purple hair, or heard her shiver-inducing voice. Ho, I hope that little redhead can spill that red stuff I love so much, I'm betting on him to make this delicious. But then again, that little blonde Gaki had some good moves as well. He's Kakashi's brat, right? Asuma took a moment to ignore the statements preceding Anko's question, then he nodded his head. Absently wishing for one of his cigarettes to fortify him enough to handle the snake mistress of Konoha, he responded. Yeah, from what I've learned, he is not a genin to be taken lightly. Most of the older Konoha ninja who heard Asuma were disbelievingly puzzled. Wasn't that the Kyuubi Jinchuriki? No way was he as skilled as they say. Obviously, the happenings in Wave had not been spread around. Kurenai had heard from Asuma about the events on the bridge in the Land of Waves, yet she was skeptical about the reports of one genin's strength. The gathered genin, seating not too far away from the Junin, had heard what they were talking about. Kiba, Hinata, Tenten, and Lee all turned their gazes to Sakura, questions in their eyes. They hadn't heard about the Wave mission either. Ino, who had been present and who never let an opportunity to gossip pass, leaned forward and spoke in a tone bursting with eagerness to share. It's true though, you should have seen him that day on the bridge, Ino's voice was abruptly cut off by the proctor's voice originating from the center of the arena. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the finals of this Chunin selection exam. We are about to begin with the first round of fights. Please sit back and enjoy the performance these young shinobi will put up for you, and remember to cheer them on. The proctor, Shiranui Genma, allowed a few moments for the crowd's cheers and roars of anticipation, and slight bloodlust, to settle down. When he was sure that they could hear him properly, he continued. The first matchup is between Hyuga Neji and Uzumaki Naruto. The gathered crowd roared in anticipation of the coming bloodshed, with the majority of the Konoha civilians visibly more in support of Neji than Naruto. That's not to say that there weren't a number of people cheering Naruto on. No, in fact, there was almost an equal number of people cheering for the blonde Jinchuriki, most of them foreigners. Most of the gathered Konoha ninja noticed this, and Asuma, who was sitting closest to one of said foreigners, turned to the man sitting close to the group. He noticed that the man's 8-year-old granddaughter was vibrating excitedly in her seat, constantly pointing at Naruto and saying things like, "That's him, Daddy, that's the nice boy who saved us. He's so cool." Asuma cleared his throat and raised his hand a little, garnering the old man's attention. Now that he was looking at him, he noticed that the old man was probably some official from one of the surrounding minor villages. With the gathered ninjas listening in, some more subtly than others, Asuma asked, "Excuse me, but I couldn't help but notice that you seem to know Naruto." Asuma's words also caught the attention of some of the foreigners sitting around the person he was talking to. Noticing that their hero was being talked about, they noticeably tuned into the conversation as well. The old man gave a kindly smile to Asuma, while at the same time placing his hand on his granddaughter's head to keep her in place on her seat. Yes indeed, we had the great fortune of meeting him about a year ago. You see, we had just been sacked by bandits and they had kidnapped our women and children, including my little one here. At that, the cute little girl gave a nod, acting all cute and solemn-like. We are a simple farming village, without armed men to take care of such things. While we were debating on what to do, that young man arrived in our village, saying that he had tracked the bandits to our location, and offered to retrieve our kidnapped people. We were all skeptical at first, until my son, the leader of our village, recognized the young man from descriptions people from other villages had given. He was able to recover all our people, uninjured, as well as all that the bandits had stolen from us. He didn't even ask for anything in return. The Konoha ninjas listening in were surprised at the old man's story. Their surprise only increased when other foreigners sitting nearby nodded their heads, saying that Naruto had done the same for them. Putting together a timeline from what they were saying, the shinobi realized that Naruto must have started such missions when he was in the last year of the academy. The Konoha civilians who were close enough to hear the old man's story were forced to reconsider all that they thought they knew about the Jinchuriki. All attention focused on the arena when people noticed that the first match was about to begin, all other present participants having long cleared out from the field. Genma stepped forward, and turning to each of the two combatants in turn, he asked. Ready. Getting a nod from each of them, he declared. Begin. The entire stadium fell silent, waiting to see who would fire the opening salvo. Neji observed his blonde-haired opponent, his acute gaze easily noting that Naruto was completely relaxed with his stance full of openings. Choosing to interpret this as overconfidence, he spoke in a cold and disdainful tone. You should give up. Fate has decided that I will be the victor in this battle. Naruto fixed him with a sharp look that was assessing, and then he sighed as though Neji had just been found wanting. Before anything else could be said, he formed a single-handed ram seal and spoke calmly. Raiden. Zukoku lightning release. Intelligent hard work. A spark was created at the tip of his upright middle finger. The spark grew into a crackling ball of lightning about the size of a golf ball. Before the eyes of everyone watching, the ball of lightning fluidly shifted into the shape of a small bird, which then proceeded to start fluttering around Naruto's head. After getting over his surprise at Naruto's actions, Neji scoffed. How disappointing, is that it? Neji had just barely finished speaking when the lightning bird dive-bombed him. Still unbothered by the obviously ineffective attack, he prepared a Juken strike to destroy the approaching bird. A scant few feet away from him, the bird exploded. In place of the small bird, a massive roaring torrent of supercharged lightning was suddenly bearing down on Neji. Many in the crowd flinched back at the unexpected metamorphosis from harmless bird to lethal beam of crackling death. Neji, without wasting time, immediately kicked it into high gear. With a cry that was just barely heard over the noise of Naruto's attack, he began to spin, Hakusho Kaden, 8 trigrams palms heavenly rotation. The massive wave of lightning slammed into Neji's revolving dome of chakra. A piercing sound, much like nails on a chalkboard, was heard as the two attacks ground against each other. The higher-ranked ninja leaned forward as they noticed that Neji's dome was buckling under the onslaught. Then, just as it seemed like Neji was about to be electrocuted, Naruto gestured and his attack abruptly ceased to exist. As Neji spun to a stop, even he was confused at the abrupt end to the attack, especially when, and he would never admit this, he was about to falter. Naruto's even tone cut through the confused mutterings of the people in the stadium. You should not have done that. Seeing that Neji did not understand what he was referring to, Naruto decided to explain. You should not have used that trump card. Now that you have shown me that move, you have allowed me to understand it. Now that I understand it, It has become useless against me. For a few moments, the stadium was filled with confused muttering after Naruto's declaration, when a scoff chock full of disdain cut through the air. Neji did not even bother to speak, he moved. In a blur so fast that the spectating genin could only just keep up, he bridged the distance between Naruto and himself. His right hand, blazing blue with a primed Juken attack, lashed out at Naruto, who shifted his head out of the way. Neji did not stumble when he missed. He fluidly shifted into another assault, his hands a blur as they struck out at the blue-eyed masked genin. Naruto kept up with his dodging, noticing that Neji was getting increasingly frustrated with his evasions. It was testament to the boy's genius that his attacks maintained their precision and fluidity even as he got more annoyed. Eventually, when Neji's attacks were moving at low Junin speeds, Naruto began to use his own hands. Knowing that it would be only foolish to try to block a direct hit, he instead chose to hit Neji's wrists, forcing the incoming attacks to deviate from their targets and miss him completely. Even when Neji tried to trick him by pulling his blows, Naruto was not fazed, neither was he hit. Naruto finally created an opening in the formidable genin's flurry of attacks by deflecting his two hands wide, allowing him an open shot to his torso. He did not hesitate. Neji let loose a grunt as Naruto's fist impacted with his chest, launching him feet away from his opponent. He was too stunned by the ridiculously powerful blow to regain his footing, and so, he crashed into the ground. Naruto watched him calmly as he got to his feet while trying to hide his wince at the soreness in his body. The spectators, scenting blood, leaned forward in heightened interest. The ninjas among them were intrigued by the crisp and fluid taijutsu exchange that the two genin had just shown. They were eager to see what more the new blood had to offer. Tenten and Lee were both surprised at the way the match had been playing out so far. It was obvious to them that Naruto had been in control from the very beginning. It was a new experience for them to see Neji in the dust instead of his opponent. Neji, finally recovered from his loss of breath, focused his gaze on his opponent, who was still calmly standing there, looking at him. He gritted his teeth because he believed that Naruto was looking down on him, just like those main branch dogs did. Quickly losing his cool, he snarled out. Do you think that because you managed to hit me, that you stand a chance at winning this fight? Don't be arrogant. You are no better than me, and besides, this match is over. Naruto watched on as Neji lowered his center of gravity, raising his hands to form a slope, pointing forward towards the ground. He didn't react when Neji spoke, already knowing what was about to happen. Hake Rokujuyan Sho, 8 trigrams 64 palms. Moving even faster than he had before, Neji was suddenly standing in front of Naruto, his hands a blur as he attacked. Hake ni Sho, 8 trigrams 2 palms. Yan Sho, 8 trigrams 4 palms. Hachi Sho, 8 trigrams 8 palms. At this point, only the spectators above low Junin level could keep track of his blurring hands. Yet, Naruto kept dodging, moving his body only enough to avoid getting hit by the skin of his teeth. All the while, his face was calm, while Neji's voice was getting more and more strained, revealing his mounting frustration. Finally, he ended with Rokujuyan Sho, 8 trigrams 64 palms. The moment the last of his chakra dissipated into midair, Naruto struck. Neji's head was abruptly forced backwards by Naruto's kick to his jaw. Just as his stunned body began to rise off the ground, Naruto bent his body forward, launching a double punch coated with yellow lightning, while intoning Sukatsu, twin bones. For an instant, they were both frozen in that position, and all was silent. One heartbeat. Blood flew from Neji's mouth and he felt his ribs buckle as they were put under stress, then he felt them fail as the force proved too much for them. 2 heartbeats. His internal organs were bruised and some blood vessels ruptured, causing internal bleeding. 3 heartbeats. The momentum of the impact finally fully translated into him and, with a sonic boom, he rocketed away from Naruto and slammed into the wall of the stadium, raising a cloud of dust. The sound of his body impacting with concrete was not loud enough to mask his scream of pain as the lightning behind the attack finally hit him. After a few moments, the dust cleared away to reveal Neji's barely standing form. Blood dripped from his mouth and bruises were already beginning to show on the patches of skin visible through the tears in his outfit. He was panting, in obvious pain, and just barely able to keep himself from pitching forward onto his face. Everyone watching took in the damage caused to Neji, many of them finding it hard to believe that it was wrought by just one attack. Neji finally straightened, unable to hide his signs of pain, and began to limp back towards Naruto. He was about 20 feet away when he was stopped by Naruto's voice. At the start of this match, I told you not to use any trump cards, yet you didn't listen. Now I have understood your Hake Rokujuyan Sho, 8 trigrams 64 palms, attack, and thus, it too has become useless against me. You claimed that fate had declared you the victor of this match. Yet, this match is over, and you have lost. Neji, and everyone else watching, followed Naruto's suddenly pointing finger and looked up. There was a small blue crackling bird hovering in place. Before anyone else could react to what was about to happen, Neji was already in motion, forcing his broken body to move as the bird dove towards him. The crowd did not jump this time, having expected the explosive change in the bird's form. However, none of them was prepared for the fearsome lightning dragon that emerged from the explosion. The elemental dragon roared towards Neji's revolving dome of chakra and, a scant few inches from impact, it swerved. Some in the audience blinked in surprise, wondering at the sudden change in direction. The blue-white dragon began to travel around the revolving dome in a circle, moving in the direction of its spin. Despite the noise from the two attacks, Naruto's voice was heard all through the stadium as he began to speak. When you used your first trump card, you revealed to me one clear fact: you are obviously a novice at using that attack. Eyes widened all around the stadium at that last statement. Hiyashi, in particular, was surprised at the implications of Naruto's words. How did he know, was the question running through his mind. What Naruto had just said was true. Even though Neji had managed to recreate a main branch technique without outside help, he still had not perfected it. It was, after all, a secret technique passed down in the main branch for a reason. He listened with increasing amazement as Naruto pointed out the weakness in Neji's technique, completely caught off guard by the genin's perceptiveness. When you initiate your revolution, you keep spinning at a constant speed. As he spoke, the elemental dragon began to speed up, slowly increasing its speed until it was moving in perfect sync with the rotating chakra dome. Naruto continued. Simple physics says that if another object were able to match that rotational speed, a relatively easy feat since it is kept constant, then as far as that object is concerned, your chakra dome would be stationary. And as everyone knows, stationary external chakra is just colored air. Before the disbelieving eyes of the spectators, the blurring dragon slowly began to merge into the dome of chakra, seamlessly slipping through it. The entire stadium vanished under a flare of too bright light and roaring sound as the elemental dragon detonated. The booming sound of thunder faded in time for the people present to hear the tail end of Neji's screams of pain. Once the spots had cleared from their eyes, they quickly refocused on the battlefield. Across the stadium, jaws dropped in shock when their owners saw the huge crater that had been formed by Naruto's attack, with Neji's smoking and charred body lying in its middle, unconscious. Into the silence, Genma's slightly amazed voice rang out. Winner, Uzumaki Naruto. The silence was abruptly shattered as the crowd surged to its feet, roaring in approval and excitement at such a fantastic match. Most of the Konoha civilians were stunned at the fact that the genius of such a prominent clan had lost to the Kyuubi Jinchuriki. The foreigners who had already had contact with Naruto were going wild, their cheers easily the loudest in the entire stadium. Amongst the gathered genin, Tenten and Lee were both silent. They knew that Naruto was strong, but to see him handily defeat Neji was more than they had ever expected. Kiba was gaping at the conclusion to the fight. His brain could not comprehend what his eyes were seeing. From what Hinata had told him, Neji was meant to be the strongest genin in their generation, and yet there he lay, defeated before the once dead last student of the academy. Watching the match, Sakura couldn't even find it within herself to be surprised. She had long since come to accept the fact that next to her teammate, all other genin might as well be civilians for all the threat that they posed him. All attempts to learn Naruto's secrets had been calmly and ruthlessly shot down by him. Not even trying to charm, seduce, them out of him had worked. Unlike before, where he used to fall all over himself trying to get her attention, now he just politely and firmly evaded her. The close-sitting adult ninja finally collected themselves after seeing the ruthless deconstruction of the lauded Hyuga genius. Anko let loose an amused whistle, and declared with a voice just slightly tinged with awe. The Gaki didn't get hit, not even once. Some of the ninja, who heard her, startled when they realized that she was indeed correct. Before they could react to that new revelation, Anko suddenly lunged to her feet, excitedly screaming out, "I'm rich! Holy shit, I'm rich!" Most of the surrounding ninjas sulked as they were reminded of the fact that they had all bet on Neji to win. With a delighted cackle, she bounced to the bookies seated not too far away. The two, Azumo and Katetsu, groaned as they were forced to fork over her winnings. The grumbling of the losers and the maddened cheering of the winner were cut off by the sudden appearance of Naruto next to Anko's jumping figure. While the gathered ninja were aborting their movements of reaching for weapons, Naruto merely smiled at Anko and held out his hand. Seeing this, Anko pouted. "Ah, come on little Gaki, you can just let Auntie Anko hold onto these for you." With a huff of exasperated laughter, Naruto shook his head in motion for her to hand over his share of the winnings. With an exaggerated sigh, Anko split the winnings in half and gave one half to Naruto. Seeing that her share was still a significant amount of money, she lost her exaggerated pout and smiled her usual hair-raising grin and spoke. "No matter, it's still a lot of dough. Good thing I agreed to your proposal, little genin." Naruto received his winnings, and with an incline of his head, he vanished to join the rest of the tournament participants. Anko turned around to meet the questioning gazes of her comrades, and decided to offer some explanation. "The Gaki found me a few days ago, and asked me to place a bet on him using some of his own money, since participants are usually not allowed to bet on themselves. After seeing him perform during the preliminaries, I decided, why not, and added my own money to his. And now, I'm filthy rich, a life's supply of dango and sake, here I come." Quote. She ended with another cackle, leaving her fellow ninja to digest that while she retook her seat. Hyuga Hiyashi couldn't take his eyes off of the unconscious body of his nephew, even following him as he was taken away to be treated by the medics. He finally sighed and, with a glance at his youngest daughter beside him, he stood up, intending to finally correct some of Neji's misconceptions. Naruto materialized next to Shikamaru on the balcony set aside for the exam participants. He paid no heed to the looks being thrown his way by some of the genin present, especially the murderous gaze of the Ikibi Jinchuriki. He stood idly by Shino as Genma announced the next match-up between Shikamaru and Tamari. Whereas the previous match had been a fast-paced exchange of furious taijutsu and powerful ninjutsu, this match was mainly waged on the mental front. Over the course of several hours, Shikamaru had managed to maneuver Tamari into a position where he was able to finally capture her using his shadow jutsu. The entire stadium was then stunned when he summarily forfeited, claiming that he was too low on Charka to do anything about it. Dissatisfied, the spectators had grumbled further when Kankuro forfeited his own match before it even started, granting Shino an automatic win. With a put-upon sigh, Genma announced the next match, Sasuke vs. Gaara. Gaara appeared in the arena in a swirl of sand and spike of chakra. His deadened gaze was locked on an increasingly flustered Genma as he waited for his opponent to show. Up in the cage box, the Sandaime Hokage turned a questioning gaze on his counterpart, the Yondaime Kazekage. Sarutobi was fully aware that the person seating beside him was actually his traitor student, Orochimaru. He fully expected his student to try to convince him to defer Sasuke's match until he arrived. Thus, he was understandably surprised when the Kazekage spoke. Orochimaru had been focused on the blonde-haired Jinchuriki from the onset. True to his expectations, Naruto had been spectacular. He fought back the instinctive need to lick his lips as he often did when observing an interesting specimen. He realized that the Sandaime sensei seemed to be waiting for his input. Although he had wanted to see the might of his next vessel go up against the power of an insane Jinchuriki, he consoled himself with the knowledge that if he couldn't watch Sasuke-kun, then he would watch the other person of interest. Really, if the boy were not the vessel of the Kyuubi, I would have marked him with my cursed seal and claimed him, such potential. He turned to his sensei, and making sure to keep his speech as close to the person he was imitating as possible, he spoke. It is my opinion, Hokage Dono, that a shinobi that cannot be on time, lacks discipline and respect for his superiors. For an instant, Sarutobi was surprised, though he was too good to let it show, until his quick mind fired rapidly and made the necessary connections. He had to fight to keep from pouncing on the imitator next to him and ripping his head off, when he realized just who was the focus of his traitorous student, Naruto. Displaying nothing to hint at the storm raging inside him, he stood up and walked to the edge of the cage box. His sheer presence easily commanded the attention of the entire stadium, and as he spoke, his even tone effortlessly carried to all ears present. When a shinobi fails to show up for such an important event, he displays an appalling lack of discipline, a terrible flaw in character. He disrespects those who have come to see him, those who are his comrades, and above all, he disrespects his cage. Thus, Uchiha Sasuke will be disqualified and struck off from the list of those being considered for promotion during these Chunin selection exams. The crowd was subdued by the ancient legend's solemn tone, many of them finding themselves unable to argue with his reasoning. The more vocal sycophants amongst the Konoha population were silenced by the numerous nodding heads around them, their intended objections stifled before they could be made. With a respectful nod to his Hokage, Genma turned back to the stadium and announced. Next match, Sabaku no Gaara vs. Uzumaki Naruto. At those words, Naruto materialized out of the air, right next to Genma, causing him to twitch minutely. Naruto's cool blue gaze was focused on the insane Ikibi Jinchuriki, who was giving him a deranged grin in return. Genma, sensing the imminent bloodshed about to occur, started the match and promptly hightailed it out of there. The spectators held their breaths in anticipation as the two juggernauts faced off. Most of the civilians present were unaware of Gaara's reputation, but even they were able to sense the bloodlust coming off of him in waves. Up in the stands, the gathered ninja were feeling anxious, though it was harder to read in the Junin. The older ninja recognized the talent and huge potential in Naruto, and they worried that it might be snuffed out by the insane red-haired Jinchuriki. The younger generation, recalling Gaara's brutality during the preliminaries, worried about their fellow genin. Ino turned to her teacher and asked worriedly, Asuma-sensei, do you think that Naruto-kun will be okay? Before her sensei could lay her fears to rest, a droll tone interrupted him. Ma, Ino-chan, Naruto is a big boy, I'm sure he can take care of himself. The gathered people flinched in slight surprise at the sudden appearance of the newcomer. Observing him slouched casually in place, ever-present orange book in hand, the older ninja were reminded of the man's legendary status when they realized that none of them had sensed his arrival. Asuma exchanged a knowing look with him when he noticed the absence of the Uchiha heir. At the start of the month-long intermission between events, the Hokage and his top ninja had gathered to discuss the issue of the presence of his traitorous student. With the additional input of Naruto's report concerning his own encounter with the snake Sannin, they came up with a plan. Shikaku easily deduced that Orochimaru's interest lay in the Uchiha heir. With that in mind, they proceeded as follows. They sent off Sasuke with the copy shinobi to a secret training ground under the guise of one-on-one training. There, Kakashi, as well as a hidden Anbu squad, would watch over Sasuke and prevent any preemptive attempts to capture him. Then during the finals, Kakashi would delay his student, causing him to be late to his match. They believed that any signal for an impending invasion would occur during the young Genin's match. As such, they intended to force Orochimaru's hand by creating a scenario in which Sasuke would get disqualified. He could be easily raised to Chunin status later, if he was deemed ready. In the event that Orochimaru did not jump the gun, Sasuke would still be kept away from him. They had decided that Sasuke wasn't so effective a ninja that his absence from the invasion would cripple their defenses. It was a win-win situation either way. Presently, Sasuke was kept unconscious in a hidden room, known only to a handful of people and out of reach of any of Orochimaru's agents. Sakura was quick to note Sasuke's absence and immediately inquired after him. Kakashi noticed that the question had also garnered the attention of the nearby people not in the know. He merely smiled and replied in a disarming voice. Well, he heard of his disqualification on the way here, and so he left to brood by himself. No one, who wasn't privy to the truth, even suspected that he was lying. He was too good to get caught. Back on the field, Gaara was getting impatient. He had been looking forward to spilling some of Naruto's blood, and he was glad that he didn't have to be delayed by fighting a weakling like Uchiha Sasuke. Deciding to make the first move, his right eye twitched. Abruptly, the cork in his gourd exploded out of its position in the mouth, rocketing towards Naruto's head. It tore through the space previously occupied by his face. Naruto vanished from his position and the ground where he had been standing suddenly cratered from the force of his push-off. Before Gaara's eyes could widen at his phenomenal speed, Naruto was already spinning in the air in front of his face, his leg on a course to plow into the side of his head. An insane smile suddenly flitted across Gaara's face as his sand, moving noticeably faster than it had during the preliminaries, was suddenly there to intercept Naruto's foot, formed into vicious spikes intended to mangle his leg. Gaara's eyes widened as Naruto's foot passed through the sand like a ghost, the obstacle causing his form, afterimage, to waver and disappear. His eyes then widened further, now from pain, when his body registered the arm planted in his gut. The silence, brought on by the sudden explosive start to the much-anticipated match, allowed everyone to hear the cracking sound caused by the spider web cracks forming on Gaara's Suna no Yoroi, sand armor. Gaara's body was stopped from flying away by a hand suddenly grasping one of the straps that secured his gourd to his back. He was dragged back in to receive an uppercut to his jaw, which succeeded in launching him feet into the air, and away from the sand on the floor. His eyes, involuntarily closed after the blow, opened only to meet the fierce blue gaze of his opponent. In a few heartbeats, he took in the scene before him. He was suspended in midair, his body upright. Naruto was suspended above him, his body pointing downwards with his hands by his side. Naruto's legs were drawn in, as though he were about to launch off a surface. Upright, with its own feet placed against Naruto's own, a clone was squatting, suspended in midair as well. Across the stadium, eyes widened in anticipation as their owners took in and understood what was about to happen. In an explosive burst, the two Narutos straightened out their legs, causing the original to be propelled towards Gaara at blurring speeds. Blue lightning suddenly erupted around his body, moments before he plowed into Gaara. His voice somehow managed to cut through the sound of crackling lightning and Gaara's scream of pain. Raiden, Ryusei lightning release, falling star. The two falling figures impacted powerfully with the floor, kicking up a huge cloud of dust and causing a huge booming sound. When the dust cleared, the spectators cheered as they saw a massive crater, with Gaara lying in the bottom. Naruto stood beside his downed body, impassively looking down at him. Thus, he was completely prepared when Gaara retaliated. Naruto smoothly ducked as a spike of sand tore through the air above his crouching form. He then pulled off a series of acrobatic maneuvers to avoid the numerous arms of sand trying to capture him. His evasion finally took him far enough away from Gaara that he was able to get back to his feet, and make his way out of the crater. Once the sand stopped rushing him, Naruto and everyone else watching focused on Gaara's figure. Gaara's head was down, his hair creating a shadow that concealed his eyes. It began subtly, but eventually everyone noticed that his shoulders were shaking. Suddenly he threw his head back and howled in mad laughter. Many in the audience shivered at the sheer amount of monster contained in Gaara's voice, all of them descending into silence at the new development. When his laughter tapered off, he brought his head back down, allowing Naruto and those in his field of vision to see his eyes. His pupils were gold and his sclera black. The more sensitive ninja easily picked up the strong undertones of Demon Yuki in his rising chakra. Gaara's chakra output eventually stopped rising, leveling off at slightly above cage levels. He gained a manic smile to match his just concluded laughter and spoke in a voice just oozing with murder. "That's it, Uzumaki Naruto. Make me feel alive." The end of his declaration was shouted out with his arms and face raised to the skies, as though in supplication. And the battlefield responded. Numerous spectators drew back in fear as mind-boggling amounts of sand rose up from behind Gaara. Gallons and gallons of sand piled up into a wave that was 20 feet tall, casting both Gaara and Naruto into shadow. Naruto was already moving before Gaara's arms had come down. Before the suddenly approaching wave hit the floor, it broke up into countless ropes of sand that through the air, approaching Naruto's dodging form, intending to capture and crush him. Gaara's arms moved in motion with the advancing the streams of sand, directing them towards his elusive foe. Naruto kept on dodging and weaving through the questing arms of sand. He was completely aware of the fact that Gaara was not just mindlessly chasing after him, and he fought to keep a smirk off his face. Up in the stands, the genin were at the edge of their seats, constantly fearing for their comrades' well-being. The adult ninja were completely focused on the two battling genin. Even Kakashi's book was put away for the time being. Kakashi was the first to see what Naruto had long since known, causing him to take an unconscious step forward in rising horror. The others around him frowned at his suddenly pale face, only focusing back on the match when they heard his hoarsely whispered words. "No, shit, it's a trap." Now that it was pointed out to them, they saw what it was that had bothered Kakashi. Gaara had been attacking Naruto, making it seem as though he was just mindlessly seeking his death. However, he had been leading Naruto towards a certain part of the arena, maneuvering him in such a way that only an outsider, watching on, could have noticed. Once Naruto landed in the designated place, the trap was sprung. Naruto froze as he registered the incoming sand, from all around him. The sand arms that he had dodged had gone past him to approach from behind him and above him. In addition to the sand coming from his front, he was basically at the center of a rapidly shrinking hemisphere of sand, with no way out. The spectators, even the two present cages, all leaned forward in anxiety and, for some, anticipation as they watched the impending demise of the blonde-haired genin. Gaara was nearly salivating in heady anticipation as he watched his sand get closer to the stationary figure of his enemy. With the entire stadium watching on, Naruto finally showed an expression on his previously disinterested face. He smiled. Before anyone could make heads or tails of Naruto's odd reaction, he acted. Across the audience, pale pupil-less lavender eyes widened in stunned disbelief as Naruto lowered his stance while raising his arms to chest height, many of their owners easily recognizing the stance for what it was. Numerous jaws then dropped when Naruto solemnly intoned, Raiden. Hakusho Kaden, lightning release. 8 trigrams palms heavenly rotation. A rotating dome of crackling blue lightning erupted from Naruto's suddenly spinning figure, easily deflecting the approaching strands of sand. As the outraged members of the Hyuga clan watched on, Naruto utilized a modified version of one of their most prized techniques, far better than Neji ever did, to survive a previously fatal situation. As the dome of chakra swatted away the questing arms of sand, some lightning bolts were discharged into the sand upon contact, instantly superheating it into glass, which subsequently shattered upon contact with the ground. Up in the stands, Hyuga Hiyashi recalled Naruto's words to his nephew, "Now that you have shown me that move, you have allowed me to understand it." Before his disbelieving eyes, he watched a genin do the impossible, absently noting that Naruto's speed of rotation was not constant, suggesting that he was better at the move than his nephew was. Naruto slowly came out of his spin, chuckling to himself at the flabbergasted look sported by a majority of the spectators. Suddenly, he vanished from his position, and because he was mean like that, he materialized in front of Gaara already in another ready stance. Previously widened lavender eyes widened even further as their owners surged to their feet with cries of outrage on their lips. Naruto's cool voice effortlessly cut through the noise in the sudden stadium. Raiden. Hake Hyaku Naijuahachi Sho, lightning release. 8 trigrams 128 palms. With a flash of blue and the crackle of electricity discharging from his fingertips, he struck. Only the 2 cages and a handful of Junin were able to track his blurred hands as he forced lightning chakra into Gaara's muscles, sometimes even hitting his tenketsu, disrupting his chakra flow and causing him tremendous pain. It was over in an instant. Gaara was launched backwards, his mouth open in a soundless scream, as the full pain of the attack bore down on him. He crashed into the floor in a twitching heap while around the combatants, previously airborne sand collapsed limply without any chakra to support it. The entire stadium was silent. The spectators too stunned to make a sound, as Naruto smoothly slid out of his finishing stance, his eyes never straying from Gaara's figure. In a swirl of leaves, Genma was suddenly standing beside Naruto, his eyes similarly locked on Gaara's prone form. His hand came up to point at Naruto as he took a deep breath to announce the end of the match. It never came. Gaara suddenly arched upwards from the floor. His mouth opened and he roared. The stadium exploded in a massive heart-stopping surge of gold and black demonic Yuki.